When it was announced that Ace Frehley, Kiss's famous spaceman, had died at the age of 74, the rock world went quiet. Besides playing guitar, he did many other things for many years. He was the beat of a generation that learned to dream while listening to Elvin Jones. Things that happened after the loss shocked fans even more than the loss itself. Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons made a statement that no one thought they would make. The same friends who used to fill in for Ace on stage now said he could not be replaced. People who helped make Kiss famous were finally giving thanks to the man who helped make the band's soul. Not only was it an apology, it was also a punishment. A quiet, moving admission that greatness isn't always seen until it's gone. But we need to go back and look at what Paul and Gene really said before we can find out what they said. Sign up right now to make sure you don't miss the next thing. The last days. The terrible event that changed everything started out in silence. Ace Frehley's studio in New Jersey at late night, with no stage lights or cameras. He slipped and hit his head on some tools, so he was rushed to the hospital. Within hours, what seemed like a small mistake turned into a major one. The doctors found a serious brain bleed and had to do surgery right away. Hope came back for a moment. Ace opened his eyes and even smiled, but he quickly fell back into a sleep because of trouble. It was 3 long weeks that his ex-wife Jeanette and daughter Monique were with him. Softly playing his music through speakers, they whispered love songs. Even though they tried hard, doctors quietly told him there was almost no chance he would get better. They hoped he could still hear them. Friends said Ace was full of life just a few days before he died. He was planning new songs and making jokes about a psychic who told him he'd live to be 100. That hope now seemed heartbreakingly prophetic, like the last thing that showed who he was: brave, funny, and powerful. The family made the hardest choice of all on October 16, 2025, after being on life support for almost 3 weeks. Ace breathed his last while being surrounded by love. It was the end of his 50-year journey through rock history. There was no encore, just quiet. Ace Frehley died of a traumatic brain injury after a fall, according to AP News, which backs up this part with facts. Still, there was something going on outside those hospital walls. The band that used to stay away from him was planning a surprise tribute. This is because Ace Frehley changed the story of Kiss even after he died. Fans were expecting the Kiss camp to be quiet after hearing about Ace Frehley's death, which led to Paul and Gene's shocking revelations. After being friends for many years, Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons rarely talked about Ace and never called him a friend. Within hours, though, both broke their silence, and fans couldn't believe what they said. Paul's speech was short, but it had a different tone. He used a word that no one saw coming after calling Ace an important part of the first chapter of Kiss, not a replacement. Knowing that man had always said the band was bigger than any one member, that one word seemed like an admission of respect, even sorrow. Even less complicated was Gene's remembrance. He said, "No one could have done what Ace did. We never denied it. And there's no one left to say it better," in a short tape that came out after a private memorial. That humility spoke a lot for someone who is known for being bossy and cocky. There was no press event or performance, just 2 men being honest about the brother they'd lost and the truth they'd kept hidden for too long. After a short time, every Kiss's social status changed to a picture of Ace as a spaceman in 1977, with the words "Forever Spaceman" written below it. Ace stood front and center in Kiss's identity for the first time in over 20 years. Fans knew at that moment that something inside Paul and Gene had changed forever. According to People magazine, Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons both spoke about Ace Frehley's impact, bringing out the emotional truth of this part and the title again. Still, we need to look back at the start of that change to see how far it went, where a tale came from. It all started with Paul Daniel Ace Frehley, a quiet dreamer from the Bronx who had crazy talent and a guitar that sounded like electricity. He became famous for his fireworks and painted faces, which would come to define an age. Ace went to a small meeting in New York in 1973 that would change the course of rock history. He had on shoes that didn't go with his outfit, a leather jacket, and a confidence that came off naturally. Everyone in the room stopped talking when he plugged in his guitar. He remembered later, "I saw this guy walking like he didn't care. And as soon as he played, I thought, I hope this is the one." That was Ace. Weird, honest, and raw. That was the start of Kiss's spaceman persona, one of his 4 famous characters. The metal suit, the guitar that was smoking, and the energy from space were all made up by Ace. He made trends instead of following them. His sound added a sense of danger and rebellion to Kiss's first records, Hotter Than Hell, Dressed to Kill, and Destroyer. His sound became known for being raw and electric with songs like Cold Gene, Shock Me, and Rocket Ride. Even when there were blasts and shows going on, his voice was clear and alive. Offstage, Ace wasn't the biggest person, but when the lights were on, he was electric. His riffs didn't come from practice. They were natural. Even though every note sounded like it came straight from his soul, as Kiss's music spread around the world and made them famous, the unity that had kept them together began to fall apart. It was easy to get rich with fame, but it also brought power, stress, and anger. And even though Ace's guitar made Kiss fly, the harmony was beginning to fade. However, cracks were appearing behind the flashy events and fame. Fearless Ace Frehley, who gave Kiss its rough edge, was slowly being stifled by artistic control. A lot of personal chaos. Inside Kiss, Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons were in charge, the planners and the achievers. Ace, on the other hand, was uncontrollable, sensitive, and couldn't stand being told what to do. He told me later that when I got to meetings, everything was already set. For him, not being heard was very painful. Then came out single albums by each member to show they could do it on their own. Critics laughed until Ace's record became the only one that got good reviews. The Spaceman didn't need the Kiss brand to shine because his song, New York Groove, went straight to the top of the charts. Not bringing people together, success made the gap bigger. Some people felt uncomfortable around Ace because he was so sure of himself, and traveling made him even more tired. His friends said that he was both bright and burning out. In the early 1980s, the kingdom that seemed unstoppable at the time was instead based on tension and contracts instead of brotherhood. Instead of magic, there was quiet anger and choices made in the boardroom. Soon, the first person to leave the fire would be the man who kissed it. Momentary pause. Press the like button if you like this deep dive. More rock fans can find stories like this one when they do. The Fall and the Breakaway. By 1982, it was clear what would happen. Months of tension and disagreements over ideas led Ace Frehley to finally leave Kiss, the band he helped grow from smoky clubs to a worldwide phenomenon. There weren't any shocking news stories or nasty fights. Everyone was just tired. Ace felt suffocated and ignored behind the scenes after the failure of the band's experimental album Music from the Elder. No decisions were made with him there. And inside Kiss, his voice had dropped to a whisper. He said he had personal reasons, but people who knew him well knew that wasn't true. He felt stuck in a system that didn't value his enthusiasm anymore. It's not possible to stay in a place where all of your ideas are shut down, he said. For a man who loved being spontaneous, that cage was too much to bear. You weren't rebelling when you left, you were just trying to stay alive. After that, Ace sent Frehley's Comet into space, a project he did by himself that brought back the chaos and creativity that made him famous. His guitar roared again, rough, soulful, and hard to guess. Fans jumped on it right away. It was clear from his first performance that the Spaceman didn't need the mothership to shine. He could not escape the past, though. The interviews became tense. Ace gave the impression that Paul and Gene were changing the past to erase his part in Kiss's story. No matter if it was true or not, the damages were real, and the split is done. But tales are real. Fans, and even his old teammates, couldn't get away from Ace, no matter how far he went. Because everybody knew that Kiss would never sound the same without Ace. They got back together and broke up. Some people's anger had calmed down by the mid-1990s, but the scars were still there. Fans only wanted to see the original members of Kiss get back together. Yes, it did happen in 1996. The reunion that can't happen. John Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, Ace Frehley, and Peter Criss. It was like 1975 all over again when the lights shone on the four stars and made their makeup shine. It was like rock history came alive for millions of people. One of the biggest hits of the decade was the reunion tour. Others praised and fans cried. And there was a bright moment when it looked like the old magic was back. Ace was electrifying on stage. His solos were powerful, his smile was sly, and his energy was unstoppable. But behind the scenes, the same problems that used to separate them were starting to show again. Kiss was now more of a business than a band. Everything was controlled by contracts, keeping up appearances, and keeping an eye on money. Ace felt like he couldn't breathe in that building. His words were, "I'm not a soldier. Everyone wasn't supposed to watch me every day." The gathering slowly went from being a happy time to a stressful one. Every outfit, phrase, and guitar solo had to follow a plan. When the goodbye tour ended in 2002, Ace was done. Unlike before, he left for good. Paul reckoned Ace wasn't dedicated. Gene said he was under too much stress. Instead, Ace's side told a story of mistrust and artistic suffocation. It didn't matter what the reason was. That last curtain call ended an era. Never again would the four originals perform together. And when the lights went out, fans were left with the same scary question. How could something so famous fail twice? In Kiss, a reuniting was never the end of the story. That storm was just another one. Section 7. Trademark fights and anger. Kiss kept performing after Ace Frehley's second departure, but something fell off. Even though the fire and loud noise were still there, fans could feel that there was something missing. The man in the silver suit came back on stage, but it wasn't Ace. Even if someone else wore the costume, Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons agreed that the figure could live on. For Ace, that choice hurt a lot. Not just a look, the spaceman was real. It was really him, a mirror of his thoughts, who he really is, what he left. Seeing someone else play guitar while wearing that mask, it made him want to erase a part of his soul. That character was made by me. He clarified. It's not enough for them to just change the look of something I made. It was acceptable for Kiss to own the trademarks, makeup, logos, and pictures, though. The men who made them didn't own them, the brand did. It became a personal problem. Gene and Paul said Kiss was more than just one person. Fans weren't sure how they felt about it. Ace saw it as betrayal. Some were happy with the continuation. Some people wouldn't recognize a Kiss that wasn't with its original spaceman. Interviews turned into a proxy fight for years. Ace always laughed when asked if he'd come back. Not unless they stopped treating me like an outsider, he said. The stress never went away completely. As time went on, the quiet got worse. One thing stayed the same through all of Ace's shows, albums, and renamed tours. No one could capture his reckless magic. The player wasn't the cleanest, fastest, or most disciplined, but he was real. The things that made Kiss great in the first place were in his sound, feeling, danger, and soul. Even though anger was still there, fate was quietly planning one last act that would wrap up their story. It was going to come the night Kiss got into the Hall of Fame, a time that should go in the Hall of Fame. Fans thought their dreams would come true when Kiss was finally admitted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2014. After decades of stress, the original four got back together for one last time. But the night wasn't like a fairy tale party. It was a reminder of how deep the wound was. Ace Frehley came by himself. You look confident and calm in your suit and smile. Though he posed for pictures, he refused to act. The reason he gave was stronger than any guitar solo when asked. To get a title I already have, I don't have to stand next to people who used to call me not useful. It was honest, didn't feel bad, and was great. Paul Stanley didn't answer directly. Gene Simmons spelled out his point very clearly. We respect what Ace said, but we have the right to move on. Those words hurt longtime fans. The promised meeting had disappeared in a cloud of polite space. The crowd went crazy when Ace walked onto the stage to accept his award. There were chants of "Spaceman, Spaceman" coming from the audience. While Paul and Gene looked at him for a moment, they weren't mad, they were just noticing him. They were aware of which team the crowd was cheering for. It wasn't a meeting at the induction. This was a wake-up call that Kiss's power wasn't in its business or brand. It was the relationship between four flawed but brave men that made something lasting. Even though they didn't shake hands, something had changed by the end of the night. Because respect doesn't always start with forgiveness, the pride gave way to thought. It starts out quiet. One last time, don't go anywhere. You'll see Kiss forever differently after reading this. Also, make sure you're signed up so you don't miss next time. A podcast about 2024 and quiet regrets. There was less noise and less anger as the years went by. Some things had changed by 2024. Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons started talking about Ace Frehley in different ways in blogs and interviews. This wasn't a problem, but because it was removed from their story, it began in silence. In a podcast that went popular that spring, Paul sounded very reflective, which is not like him at all. He said in a soft voice, "I don't know if it's worth holding on to something that's been bad for so long. There was a powerful thing we shared. That could be the most important thing. Although not an apology, it was pretty close. That kind of truth that you can't get until you've been away for years. Thanks, Gene. Most of the time, the louder person said more, but spoke less. That year, someone asked him about Ace, and he said, "There's only one Ace Frehley. Copying real things isn't possible." Those words were important because they came from someone who had once defended replacing him. Fans wondered right away if a return was finally possible. The people who started Kiss might be ready to heal. That being said, Ace's answer was heartbreaking. Even though he thanked them for their words, he stayed grounded. Sometimes it's better to remember things. After decades of anger, humility took over for the first time in decades. It went from being cold between them to quiet respect. These quiet thoughts and unspoken recognitions of what used to be were their last words on the subject. While the music was playing, the truth started to play. The tradition brought back. It was the end of a life when Ace Frehley died in October 2025. It was also the end of a chapter in rock history. For many years, the name Kiss had stood for show and fire. Now, all of a sudden, the flames went out and were replaced by quiet, which was strange. Everyone wasn't expecting Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons to do what they did in that silence. They returned Ace's heritage. All of Kiss's public social media accounts changed their profile pictures to Ace's famous spaceman portrait from 1977 within hours. There were only 2 words glowing in silver letters on the band's website before it went totally black: "Forever Spaceman." Fans everywhere felt the weight of that honor. It wasn't business. People were sad. Both Paul and Gene told their media team behind the scenes to bring back Ace's performances on all digital channels. Things like old interviews, videos, and live records that had been buried for years came to the surface all of a sudden. According to internal notes, Paul told the team that they should treat everything that has to do with Ace with respect, not any cuts or replacements. Even Gene, who had always seen Kiss as a business, agreed with the move in a quiet way. He is said to have said this in a secret meeting: "I earned this." In Kiss's formal records, all of its members, living and dead, were displayed equally for the first time in decades. It wasn't an apology, it was a repair of a deeper kind. The kind of move that could be understood without words. Ace had always been different, with a heart that didn't follow the beat. But now, finally, that beat was being respected. It wasn't through sound or show that the spaceman story had come full circle. Silently, and with respect. Since everyone needs peace before they disappear into the stars, even tails. This blathering jerk. In this part, Legacy Restored, Net gathers detailed statements from Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, and Peter Criss to back up their public tributes and emotional reflections. Frehley wasn't just a guitarist. He was a force of nature. For his fans, he stood for more than just fame and skill. He was the perfect example of freedom, chaos, and being yourself. He proved that rock music didn't have to be perfect to be strong. Feel was more important to him than perfect accuracy in his playing. The sound he made could make your heart race, even if a note was bent too far or a solo went off track. Ace's raw energy never went away, from the smoky bars of the Bronx to the biggest shows in the world. He wasn't moving like a star. He was moving like a man who was crazy about sound. The room changed when he tilted his head back and let those riffs go off under blue and purple lights. In fact, many artists, from Mike McCready to John 5, say that Ace was the first thing that made them want to play the guitar. He made flaws look beautiful and defiance look easy. And whenever he made a mistake at work or in his personal life, he did it with the same arrogant grin that said, "I'm still here." Fans saw Ace as more than just the spaceman. His songs gave everyone who felt like they didn't belong a voice. For him, breaking the rules wasn't necessary to make history. It was all about having the guts to be yourself, even when everyone else wanted you to be someone else. And that's why his story was important in the end. We were told that rock and roll is about being alive, loud, and not afraid by Ace Frehley, who did more than just play guitar. Even though the man isn't there anymore, the spaceman still shines every time a guitar in the night. In the end, Ace Frehley's story wasn't about fame or feuds. It was about leaving a legacy. Beginning as an outsider, he became a rock star, then fell hard, but his heart stayed the same. And through every breakup, silence, and comeback, he showed one thing: you can't replace being real. When Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons finally said that he could never be replaced, It wasn't just a compliment. It was an admission that he was the one who made Kiss magic. The man who created the songs, makeup, and swagger didn't care about fitting in. He only cared about being himself. Ace didn't just play music. Unlike music, he was unpredictable, flawed, and memorable. His legacy will last forever, because even if the lights go out and the amps turn off, the spaceman's voice will live on in every chord, every stage, and every fan who ever believed in rock's wild heart.